voices, often rushing to the origin point of any loud source of noise. Oh, and here's a scary thought for all of you. Virals know how to open doors. Now, these virals live outside for a considerable amount of time, thus being exposed to plenty of UV radiation. They become fighters. These shapely monstrosities care little for their well-being and cannot run. They are pretty early. Now, some of them, for some reason, emit toxic gas and others are molecular bonds. Some of these fighters get a stab off at night as well and become night riders. These assholes will suddenly learn what the body is like viral. Viral incident impact affecting your business. That being said, viral stays essentially dark later radiation for long periods of time. They may just turn into a volatile. These animals are a killing machine. You're stupidly very stupid. They're better than you. Will call for help. And are strong as fuck. They only come on at night and are easily repelled by UV light, which is a relief. But you want to know what isn't a relief? They can seemingly reproduce somehow in volatile nests, which, by the way, is not a location you ever want to visit during the day. Volatiles also have members of their tribe known as alphas, who aren't just your typical volatile, but fucking stronger. And then there's the tyrant volatile in Dying Light 2, who's even worse than the aforementioned freaks. If a kid gets infected, they turn into a screamer, who screeches so loudly it literally causes you pain, while also attracting virals, volatiles, and biters. Some of the infected will mutate into goons, or strong jerks who will bitch slap you and smash you with their rebar hammer. Then there's the demolishers, or Dying Light's version of the tank. This big fella will run you down and blow your back out. And God forbid you ever run into both of these variants at one time. The average person literally gets bench pressed by these bodybuilder infected. Then there's the problem or spitter or whatever the fuck it's called. This ugly creature will just spit corrosive acid at you and will suddenly run away like a bitch. There's even a special infected whose entire job is just to run away. And who could forget about the already infected and literally losing the kingdom cause. And there's also all the updated series from Dying Light 2, many of which are not that different from the original game's special effects. But there are some notably different variants, like Dying Light's own Charger and Hunter variants. All in all, the number of threats presented to us by the coronavirus makes survival extremely difficult because each of the special infected requires different approaches to avoid, escape, and or to terminate said special infected. Totally the way into this. Yeah, that's great. Jeff, gas and back on. Is it really? Tell me if you need a replacement. Yeah, well, I'm afraid you're going to have to find a replacement. Given all of the information we've covered thus far, could you realistically survive a coronavirus outbreak? Well, in the first game, the virus spread slowly enough to allow the military to quarantine all of Iran behind an Attack on Titan-style wall, which is, to be frank, an impressive engineering feat. But during the time skip between Game 1 and Game 2, the tacky transmissive Iran virus managed to cause all of humanity to fall, which is somewhat mysterious to me, given that the virus requires physical contact, and that the infected aren't particularly fond of large bodies of water, nor does the outbreak occur everywhere simultaneously. There's a clear and distinct epicenter to both outbreaks, yet it somehow spread across vast oceans undetected when it couldn't even spread beyond the confines of a quarantined third world city. But given that symptoms don't occur instantly, I guess it's fairly plausible for this virus to make it across a transatlantic or trans-Pacific flight undetected, which, again, is highly suspect to be given that countries would shut down their borders pretty quickly and would likely be screening refugees at every conceivable port of entry and exit. But then again, that might not happen in lesser developed nations. So I guess it's possible, for example, for the virus to land in, say, Venezuela, via an infected person who has not yet developed symptoms, and then for it to spread like crazy until, well, collecting massive forms, they can too and break through the U.S. border, assuming they somehow manage to cross the Panama Canal. It's also possible that countries felt safe in the existence of the initial vaccine for the original virus. That is, until it became pretty apparent that the said vaccine was useless. Who fucking knows? All I know is that the second game score makes no sense to me. From an epidemiological perspective, at least. Realistically speaking, neither variant of coronavirus can bring humanity to its knees. It would seriously require mass incompetence at an epic scale for such an outcome to actually occur. I will say this though, aside from the issue of global contamination, I'd say whatever country or continent this pathogen breaks out in is essentially covered. Every initial infected person is a viral, and once the special infected begin to increase in numbers, one's odds of survival will begin to plummet. Once society breaks down and the power grid goes out, volatiles will be feasting on non-infected persons while reproducing in their nests. Like, you literally need UV lights and a source of reliable electricity in order to reliably survive the night. Without such resources at your disposal, you would have to be incredibly stealthy and low profile to avoid being detected by ravenous apex predators who are actively hunting for prey every night. And sure, you don't need headshots to kill these infected, but the fact that virus can open doors, climb shit, and dodge attacks makes the initial outbreak insanely dangerous. You literally need to know parkour just to have a chance at surviving. Even using a firearm will sound the dinner bell for your location. And if you come face to face with a demolisher or even a killer, a gun might not even save you. They're literally armored with hardened skin and dense muscle fibers. And God forbid you fail to notice a spitter sniping you with corrosive acid that may, in itself, be infectious. Also, for some reason, these infected persons don't seem to starve or die of dehydration. If they did, the Iran quarantine zone would have been infection-free after some time. Yet that never fucking happened. So unless they're infected, they will be infected. Some turning into volatile. Things can even be worse if we can get confirmation of the infected and volatiles in particular being by someone. Now, in order to survive in such a scenario, one would need access to a reliable source of electricity, UV lights, thermal systems, and a sterile shelter, which is even the countryside. We literally see this happen in comic books following DLC. No place is truly safe when you're contending with predators that actively hunt people every fucking night. Hell, the virus look for you during the day at night. So aside from being electricity, lights, fortress, and soundproofing, you can potentially survive by digging in cars going around your computer base. You can also survive by living at sea or by living in extremely remote areas that are highly unlikely to be visited by wandering virals and volatiles. Oh, and I almost forgot this, but you can actually use infected guts or blood to camouflage yourself from the infected in the same way you could. So yeah, that's a neat little survival tip. Sadly, for most of you viewing this, these options will not be available to you if the outbreak occurs in your region. Because on top of having to contend with all of these problems, you'd also have to deal with the inevitable localized collapse of society in your area, which not only would entail supply shortages for essential goods, but would also mean the collapse of energy infrastructure and the manifestation of desperate and violent survivors who might take your shit. Long story short, your odds of survival are pretty fucking dim. By the way, if you'd like to see me play Dying Light, let me know in the comments section. As a matter of fact, I recently played the game with my good friend Mexico. If you want to see us dick around while he explains why Dying Light is such a good fucking game, feel free to check out his channel, which is linked in the description of this video. And since we're on the topic of my boy McSpoons, how's about we hear from him right now on this topic? My man, do you think you can survive this crazy ass zombie outbreak?
That's a good question, Captain Gold. And let me put it eloquently. No, there's no fucking way I'm going to. The reason I will not survive this zombie apocalypse in particular is, while I also don't have any of the fundamental skills necessary to survive a zombie outbreak, like hunting and building a shelter, I don't have the most crucial skill that is a necessity when it comes to the coronavirus. I can't climb for a dick and a half. I can barely touch my toes. So if I, by God, manage to climb up some kind of building to gain elevation against these monsters, and they start climbing after me, I'm fucked. And well, that's just the daytime. I don't know if you noticed that at nighttime, all the fucking monsters in the lifetime is not monsters that are faster than me, stronger than me, and they won't go up. That's very interesting. We both react to light the same way. Look, I would love to stand here and tell you all the ways you can tackle this virus, but no fucking way. I, you, and everyone else is dead as hell. Sorry. Unless you give me parkour, then I'll listen.
Anyways, if you like this sort of content, please like, share, and comment, subscribe to the channel. Click the bell as well, that way you may be notified when I publish a new video. And remember that you can anytime, as well. Yeah, but I think I'll get started. I'm Captain Dayz. Hope to see you in the next standard video. This week, we share the hardcore Dayz with rabies care package inbound. Anti-vaxxers would probably reconsider their standpoint in this scenario. Given leopardheads infected or red colored money, it's not a fear of ice, it's a fear of falling. Good night, good luck. Hopefully the sequel isn't made us. This is matter stating AAA games have been promising for years. Zombies that don't want to eat your brains, but talk to your brains, and their brains, especially effective brains, response to shockingly. Game itself. This week, we are saying, survive 9 months from on fire. As with any of these that result in this start rating anti-personal self-protection. And dying like Jesus. We see it. Turkey generations of entire development specific expansive personalization for centuries, even since the first 2 protection is steady and as we begin the city comes actions made. What's named Turkey gave him power to origins of the virus are mostly rumors, speculation, and hypothesis, but there are 2 prominent ideas that have been stated. The hardest-believed version of the virus's origin comes from a lone conspiracy theorist named David, who claims that an alien race named Negandoids sent an asteroid laced with infection to Earth. Why? Because there are reptilians from the planet Orion that created the Illuminati using the virus to create an army of slaves to do Negandoids' bidding. Oh my god. Oh my god. We're not alone. This also could be inspired by Romero's universe, where a satellite in Mars crashed into an American cemetery, released a virus, and awoke the dead. However, that's just a theory. A game theory. But the more realistic hypothesis, with researched fortitude, is that the virus was man-made by a military who launched this infection into the none the wiser town of Iran. Since they rely on complete self-governance and are free to control their own affairs, it may seem like it was the perfect testing site to unleash a contained experiment, observing how the virus would mutate, adapt, and ravage a population, while also taking note of how normal citizens react, fight back, and try to either escape or quell the outbreak. More theories on this will be brought up as we progress through the video. The virus, which simply will be referred to as the Haran virus, spread like wildfire in the short time it was introduced. But what exactly is the virus, and what does it do to the human host? Well, like I said at the beginning, it's very reminiscent of the infections in 28 days later, and more relatedly, Left 4 Dead. But rage monkeys and an airborne virus weren't the beginning instruments of this symphony of destruction. Instead, the virus is much more traditional and linear in the sense that it is only transferred directly to an infected spot with fluids to a healthy host. Adapted as a pathogen extremely similar to that of rabies, an extremely viral disease that once entered the bloodstream will multiply exponentially and eventually infiltrate the brain of any mammal, causing death with fever, erratic behavior, violent tendencies, seizing of one or more body parts, irrational confusion or paranoia, passing out, and even a fear of water. Although this spread could be prevented if the bite occurs on the arms or legs, resorting to amputating the afflicted limb right after being bitten within a reasonable amount of time. If the
main cause of its spread is due to the virus manipulating the host mammal to become overtly aggressive and attacking in the primitive form of biting and or scratching. The rabies virus will then easily transfer to the victim's nerves or saliva. Although rabies can take a wide range of time to fully infect and incapacitate the host, its symptoms are too prominent to ignore, although it may be mistaken for other diseases. Once it has been correctly diagnosed, it can be treated fairly easily if done within the first 10 days of infection, with proper vaccinations and a 14-day round of doses. But in most cases, once neurological symptoms have arisen without vaccinations, it is fairly certain that full infection will follow. The coronavirus borrows from its sister pathogen, and the contraction process is much more streamlined, seeming to reach the neurological stage within hours or days. The time frame varying with the DNA structure of each individual host, a much less forgiving schedule than rabies. Once bitten, cut deeply, or injected directly by the virus, the victim will experience bouts of exhaustion, blurred or double vision, and seizures. After a while, their skin will become extremely pale, their face will become more sunken in, and their body will appear to be suffering from malnourishment. To prevent fully succumbing to the neurological defects of the virus, the GRE may suppress an antigen that can nullify the process entirely. But as Dr. Zier says,
Suppress it. It's called antigen. Suppresses the symptoms. Antigen will slowly see inevitable.
much like the Zombrex and Dead Rising, with how rapidly the infection spreads, Iran's Ministry of Defense quarantined the city, bombing all outgoing bridges and walling off or caving in any tunnels in and out of the city. The GRE global relief effort created in reaction to the coronavirus in a somewhat form of conjunction with and against the Ministry of Defense, a humanitarian relief organization attempting to aid those within the quarantine areas of Iran, from developing the antizine to flying C-130 Hercules cargo planes to airdrop supplies to the victims. However, it is discovered that later down the road, the GRE do not wish to stop or cure this disease at all, but she discovered a way of weaponizing it to sell for a fairly fetching price, most likely to whichever government or terrorist organization bids the highest on it, which may show the organization may have been behind the outbreak from the start, considering they were the ones who manufactured a temporary cure to the disease and sent in an agent who was ignorant to their true intentions and in order to execute Suleiman, creating the suppression of antizine in order to temporarily cure those afflicted with the coronavirus may have also been included to them being the culprits behind the outbreak, just in case key personnel have been bitten, kind of like Crane, while also trying to seem innocent with frequent antizine drops into the quarantine zone. The virus itself can be killed when it's directly exposed to ultraviolet radiation or even sunlight, but that is only in cases of being under a microscope. If someone is bitten, the virus will act too fast and spread through their bloodstream enough to not be fully affected by UV or light exposure. However, this weakness to UV rays and sunlight resonates with the affected, as they either are less aggressive during the day or avoid daylight in general and become nocturnal, and can be repelled by any producing lamps or lights, as it will cause them pain and disorientation. It's because of this natural enemy that the coronavirus infected have adapted to existing mostly for the night and utilize a new sense of night vision to easily traverse the darkness. If the virus is allowed to run its full course, there is no going back. Your brain will enter a state of decay, and your motor functions will still be highly active, but way out of your control. Although not widely known or experimented on at this point, depending on the host, the environment and possible erratic mutations fluctuating with the virus will transform your body and mind into one of several variants of the coronavirus's living fight or flight guinea pig. The earliest and most common stage of infection is the viral, forcing the host to become excessively violent as will most of its predecessors. They will launch a full-scale attack at anyone around them without any restraint. In 30% of these cases, the victims will pronounce coherent human dialect and try to communicate with those around them. Unable to control their own bodies, begging others to either run or mercy kill them before it's too late. Kind of like how the flood take over someone, as well as some people that are infected by the cordyceps brain infection like The Last of Us. They will run at full sprint whenever pursuing and healthy, but will not fight them when they finally reach them, attempting to punch and kick a victim to death instead, showing that they are completely sterile but will not succumb to just biting the victim. They, like all their brothers and sisters, are also attracted to loud noise. virus, the viral will eventually start to decompose and turn into their slower counterparts, the lighter, also sluggish and more of a traditional zombie, just like its namesake, will seek to find survivors to infect them, mainly probably due to their brain decay. Not completely dead yet, daylight severely limits their motor skills, as it seems more of the virus is prominent and prone to be affected by this natural enemy. At night, these limitations are withdrawn, giving the miners more mobility and an increase to their aggression and threat level. Some miners will retain the knowledge to fight beyond the bite and will either slug survivors with a powerful right or left hook like the bruiser, or even further with the goodness, possibly mutated from men of bulkier physiques or sporadic production of growth hormones within the human body. Goons will retain the know-how to use basic heavy melee weaponry at full force to crush survivors, although the downside to all that bulk is its very slow-moving pace, so avoiding them wouldn't be as difficult, but encountering it within close quarters would not be recommended. However, these are just the basic forms of the infection, much like a common infected in Left 4 Dead. While you are attempting to run from basic zombie archetypes, their mutated forms will slowly begin to pop up left and right, causing varying levels of danger, and in some cases, velocity. First off, the bomb would have had its front torso corroded through, probably by stomach acid, and most of their organs on full display for any passerbys, possibly caused by the Heron virus accelerating the stomach acid production enough to where it eats through the lining and melts the skin. The acceleration of cells by the virus may also be overclocking the body in general, and the stimulant either caused by being around a survivor or having a concentrated source of light on it may cause the bomber's body to hit critical mass and explode, sending sharpened bone shrapnel in all directions, potentially knocking back and killing nearby survivors. Creatures like the toad, though not you, can be found mostly near ocean fronts and bodies of water, possibly with their deadening tissue absorbing high amounts of water, giving it a bloated appearance. Their stomach lining has mutated enough to repurpose itself as a long-distance cannon. They will spawn false and found the prey to the them or severely burn them from a distance. I feel like I've heard this before. For some reason, those in security and important riot gear will adapt to mutations in a different way than others, although it is said to be developed from a failed experimental strain of the coronavirus. These specific infected becoming tank-like and charging at survivors with slow but reckless abandon. The demolisher. If this guy feels like he is not capable of raining into the survivors at close quarters, it will find and hurl debris at them in order to incapacitate them from afar, showing moderate levels of battle sense. This sounds familiar too. These may have been among the first infected that researchers slapped riot gear on to make them more resistant to damage and resilient they are. Being able to take large amounts of heavy ammunition to just about any part of the body until they finally tumble over while direct combat is not advised. For once in a zombie outbreak, children are showcased, and they are definitely not safe from becoming screamers. While not an immediate threat, they will wander about crying to themselves like a witch, and when spotting a healthy human, will scream at a high enough decibel to disorient the survivor and attract its adult cohorts to converge on its location. They are commonly found either in the homes, schools, or familiar places by themselves to liberate gullible survivors. Much again, like the witch from Left 4 Dead. While the game only allows you to hold them and snap their neck, you should be able to pop them with a good shot to the cranium. Interestingly enough, one type of infection called the Bolter will not engage survivors in any form and will actually run at an almost cheetah-like speed to escape. Mutations possibly strengthening its leg muscles to produce running speeds that high, covered in almost tumor-like growths. This infected does everything in its power to bolt when spotted by survivors. However, they will observe people for however long they can until they have noticed, depicting some kind of observational intelligence. They can alert nearby zombies by yelling, similarly to the screamers, but not as loud or frequently. When not startled, they will prey like vultures and decaying corpses left behind by others. So they are dangerous in the fact that they can rally more infected to your area, dip out, and return to eat your dead body if it doesn't turn. The giant or savage variants of these types exist as freaks in nature as well, leaving smaller, weaker versions of the zombie types to spread the disease, and can cause more chaos, destruction, and take a lot more damage. But things only get worse as night draws near. With the sun no longer out to suppress the strength and aggression of the zombie hordes, the most lethal forces of the infected ranks will emerge and take chase. The iconic infected in the franchise is a veritable conglomeration of every infected type, as well as the mutations that led to their creations. The volatile, utilizing the strength of the goo, diluted but still affected speed, filter, having the ability to spit acidic phlegm from the toad, the corrosion of the epidermis and exposure of the innards like the bombers, and hard exoskeletons, somewhat like the demolisher. The volatile is relentless once it spots its prey, sprinting great distances, scaling walls and buildings with ease, dousing victims in acid, and finding relative ease with pinning others down, using its floppy mandibles to latch on and allow for a deeper bite and accelerated infection rate. If it sets its eyes on you, it will not give up the chase, no matter the distance or height, unless we're equipped with UV ray producing tech, or if you can run away from it long enough for the morning sun to force it to run into hiding. They also will tend to hunt in packs, making the chase even more threatening, as its screams could attract the more aggressive Huron victims around. If you do end up trying to fight it head on, melee would not be recommended, as it would easily ensnare you in seconds as you try to get the first swing in. As for firearms, the hard exoskeleton it has will make more powerful weaponry take a few extended shots before taking it out. If the mutation accelerates within a volatile enough, they can become alphas among their packs and evolve form. With adapted natural armor, its ribcage even more prominently spiked and jagged, and the skin becoming blackened in areas depicting how violently the virus is attacking the host body. Naturally, their physical capabilities are magnified, allowing for more damage to be done as well to be taken. But their natural instinct is to actually fire their acidic phlegm at survivors more often than their less evolved counterparts. They will also travel amongst regular volatiles in order to procure prey and increase their Huron virus's kill count. And the king of the zombies itself, the Night Hunter, may appear only during critical conditions, as it was never really seen in the main game or story, just the multiplayer being the zombie game type. With the ability to adapt and wield a litany of powers and abilities ranging from hunter bouncing long distances, spitting toxic goo at long ranges to engulf survivors like the spitter, charging through enemies, vomiting on enemies, and bringing in infected reinforcements by smell as a real boom, and to ensnare enemies from afar with its now weaponized innards, and be able to take damage and swipe you down in a witch hunt. Basically, it's just every single one of the special infected slapped together in one body. Let's just hope it doesn't try and hump your head to fix you up like a jockey. But how exactly does it come into existence? The only real conclusion that can be established for the creation of this overpowered hyper-mutated Left 4 Dead clusterfuck, spoilers ahead if you haven't played the following DLC or Dying Light. But if you choose the option to not do on and everything around, Valkyrie will attempt to return to his friends with a cure, but be forced to drink said cure by the sentient volatile known as the Mother. I'm about to hit you with some conspiracy-ass stuff leading towards the military theory I spoke of earlier, but the wife of a Huron colonel named Jasmine attempted to use the so-called cures. However, the vials of these so-called cures were actually further government experimentations to weaponize the virus, leading to her transformation into the only known sentient volatile to this point capable of rational thinking, behavior, non-violent tendencies, and interestingly enough, telepathic communication. Applying the virus does have psychoactive capabilities. However, when that draws near, the virus will take full control of the sentient volatile, blacking them out of their thinking and becoming just another feral hunter that will attack until morning draws near once again. Labeled the Mother by those who found her as a religious deity who walks between the living and the so-called dead, cults can be established around those subjected to the weaponized cure. Once if the army were to find supporting subjects, the demonstrate would have these sentient volatiles in the past. If you decide not to,
way. Okay.
Just
huge, right? I remember when my kids were little watching the Wildcats. There was a Wildcats episode about honey badgers, how they were all cute when they were babies because they were hiding in camouflage.
Yeah, maybe when their babies are cute. They're pretty ferocious.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, they're very similar. Yeah, I think they're all in the same family, right? Yeah, there he is. Look at that face.
I think they love
Look at that face. He's just a big old deadly snake. That's his lunch. And they get bit all the time. And they just like, they get sick, pass out for a couple minutes, then recover and kill the snake.
That's amazing.
Yeah, they're ferocious little animals.
So have people been able to understand better anti-venom properties from studying them?
That's a really good point. How face.
Yeah.
Oh my.
It all looks vicious.
That is such a crazy animal.
That pattern of comes very beautiful.
Oh, they're wild looking. They're wild looking. I just hope they don't bring them to Florida. Because it sounds like someone's going to do it. You know, like, it sounds like a Florida idea.
Have you heard about the hippo solution, the early 20th century?
No.
So this is a great sort of American history story. Because, you know, our country is replete with people with brilliant ideas, right? And in the early 20th century, when the land of the West was not doing so well, they overgrazed, there were too many cattle, there was this thing called the meat question. It was the thing of the day, the meat question. People were talking about how are we going to survive if there's not enough cattle? Maybe we're going to have to eat our dogs. And at the same time, there was a problem in the Mississippi and other places where the World Fair, people had brought New Orleans, who was the host city of I think in Japan, they brought New Orleans this water hyacinth, this water as a gift, and they loved it, so they planted it everywhere, and it just grew like absolute crazy. It was choking up the river, like ships couldn't get through because it like mad every more, like oil on it to get it to sink, while trying to put it on fire, and nothing would happen. And this team of people that included congressmen from the museum and came up with a solution for both problems at once, and that was that they were going to import hippos from Africa into Louisiana, to live on the bayous, they would eat the plants with this water kind of thing, and then we could eat them. And that was going to be the perfect solution to both of these problems. Yeah.
How did that get stopped?
It was an accident. So it's actually a fun story. You should look it up and read the whole story because it involved these two guys. One of them was the guy who was the inspiration for the Boy Scouts of America. Another guy was like a con man who worked as a journalist and these other things. And they had actually been employed during the Gulf Wars to kill each other. But they came together on part of this congressman's team. The scout thought it was a great idea. He wanted people to bring in all sorts of animals from Africa and put them in national parks. So that people would want to go to national parks and that would have more reason for people to want to support the idea of national parks at the time, which is great, like this utility of nature. It seems weird compared to how we think of it now, but I think this is really important. It's a really important part of the way we got conservation legislation in the U.S. So he was excited about this, and then the congressman, when he was pulling together the team of people that he wanted to be on his side for this, he went to show that this other guy, the sort of con man, traveling salesman, pimp, escape artist dude, was having about how he was an intrepid explorer. And he was like, yeah, guys, I'm an expert as well. He can also be on my team. And they testified in front of Congress, and they asked questions like, how do you know that they're safe? How do you know that they're tame? This con man, he was like, well, there's plenty of evidence that you can even feed them little babies, but no evidence whatsoever. Right? Just everybody was like, yeah, awesome. Even the New York Times was completely behind it. They published an editorial talking about, they called the hippos lake cow bacon.
What year was this?
This was in the early 20th century. Yeah.
Lake cow bacon.
This is what's Teddy Roosevelt. Yes, let's go on through
Bill has something increase the availability of low-cost meat by importing the hippopotamus that would be killed to make lake cow bacon.
It's brilliant. This is such a, it's so funny, but it's not fair to call it failed because it didn't fail. It never came up for a vote. So they had testified, but it was too late for it to come up to a vote that year, and then just another shit happened when people stopped paying attention.
That's it?
Yeah.
Just went away.
Yeah. So near miss on the hippos.
But they kill more people in Africa than any other mammal, right?
Yeah, well, and now we know that they're good at hunting invasive. You saw there's hippos that live now in Colombia because of Pablo. Nobody knew what to do with them. Yeah. They started off with just a handful of them, but now there's like dozens of them down there.
What are they doing about that?
Nothing. I think they keep rounding them up and putting them back on his property.
So how much property did he have?
I don't know the answer to that, Phil.
That is so crazy that you should have hippos and just get loose down in Colombia as hippos.
He took them there on purpose, though, just like we wanted to bring them here. Can you imagine how bad that would be, though? And, I mean,
That's the wild horse in the United States. That's William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst wanted wild pigs on his property. And so he imported them from Russia or somewhere in Europe. And then these wild pigs have now populated all through California. They're all over the place now.
yeah, it's crazy. We did have wild pigs around the U.S. at some point, but it's the same thing, right?
That's the question. I think they came over on boats with explorers, and Randolph Hearst. They all the ones around like the northern California area. I think all of those are the remnants of William Randolph Hearst pigs.
Yeah.
They think.
We don't see them in Alaska, Yukon, where we find all these big stashes of them.
Yeah.
It's probably not that they came over like that with like bison and horses and
Right. Where did the wild boars have it? It's the original country.
I think, well, at first it looks like domestication of pigs, and they published a bunch of different papers that are always contradicting each other. He gave a hilarious talk at a meeting I was at last week about how he keeps saying something different as a way of, keeping to publish more papers. He was just being nice about how he's open to changing his mind. It's a valued trait in a sense, but so the data around data, I think, is the origin, or at least the domestication, and normally things are domesticated around where they were.
Well, it's kind of weird to sound more, right? Because the domestic ones will become they morph when they go feral really quickly. It's like they start in like 6 weeks.
See, this is why evolution works, right? Something has a particular suite of traits.
So the testimony of when this was going on, this is the guy who presented this.
The actual thing.
He's talking about pigs right here, where they're going to bring them to Manchuria as a
Were they the most delicious things?
yeah, they're also talking about bringing cows.
Yeah.
I think they did bring in camels in like 1853.
Well, we have camels. There were North American camels that were here during the Ice Age.
It's a bad test or something. This is 1853. They're talking about bringing antelopes in. They asked, like, are they easily tamed? Domesticated? Like, they're very easily tamed.
That's Irwin. So this is the guy who worked for I guess what became the USDA, but he was in charge of animals. But he was really dedicated to trying to solve the speed problem, and he saw importing African animals and animals from other places as the real solution to this. Yeah.
Well, they've definitely done that in Texas. Texas is overrun with African animals. With all the private ranches filled with elands, eelguy,
That's
and all
cool.
the beast.
We used to have so many cool animals here that all went extinct at the end of the Ice Age, so why not? Maybe we had mammoths. Why shouldn't we have hippos?
No, but isn't it weird? But it's again, that's the same argument. You're like, can you bring in an invasive species?
Is it invasive, though, if it used to live here?
Well, it's invasive in the sense that the wolves that are in Colorado right now, they're eating all cattle. It's kind of invasive.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
I
They're
think-
not invasive because they do live. I mean, there are wolves actually just into the San Juans. I think documented like natural migration as opposed to the reintroduction. I think there was something I read about that yesterday. But the wolves that they've introduced to like outside of Madison in particular, I have a friend who has a ranch out there and posted about it on Instagram. He actually sent me some more pictures yesterday. He was posting about so much crazy stuff was happening out there. It's not talking about problems. But they're just killing cows and they're ready to know. They're just eating the tasty parts and feeding these cows. And these people are on 24-hour ragged, they have these teams of guys that have to patrol the area 24 hours a day to try to scare off the wolves. And they have them shoot them. They spend millions of dollars for anything there, and they're just eating cattle.
I imagine it's really devastating to see something like that happening and know that somebody else made this decision, and then you experience it for, I mean, I imagine that people who voted for them, I wonder what they imagine.
It's biology, right? You get a bunch of people that live in cities that don't have a lot of experience in nature and ecosystems, and then you introduce this idea, we're going to bring wolves back to their native habitat. Oh, that sounds amazing. What they're not telling you is like this. What this rancher told me is that first of all, the original wolves that were introduced to the Colorado, wolves that were taken from Oregon, because these wolves prey on cattle, so they
So they already had a taste.
exactly. They already had habits, and so then they brought them into Colorado where they started preying on cattle. And so then they moved them from this area where they were preying on cattle and put them outside of Aspen, where they
Prey on cattle.
start preying on cattle. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
And it's, again, it's not just some their idea, it's biology.
This is
They get scared by the Colorado government.
It's so important to actually talk to wildlife biologists and ecologists. We can see from Yellowstone how important having these keystone predator is in ecosystems, where they can be and where there's space for them when the land doesn't look the same as everywhere else in Yellowstone. We need to be able to make, when I was at Santa Cruz, I taught an introductory biology class for non-majors where my goal was to give the students tools to be able to think on their own, which is harder than you might imagine. And their midterm exam was a debate, and the topic of the debate was that wolves should be introduced into California.
Why not New York City? Let's go.
Well,
Put them everywhere they used to be. I mean, this is where it gets silly. It's like when you're dealing with people who have cattle ranches, and this is their entire livelihood. And all they're doing now is just compensating them for the cows that get killed. And then so you have a list that goes every year. So it's like the whole thing is crazy. They were already on their way to do a natural migration into Colorado.
right, and it would have been different.
Yes, it would have been different with some of those wolves too. Because I think there's also like some of the wolves that are being introduced, they're introduced from British Columbia. Or being, introduced from Alberta or somewhere up there. I think those are the ones that came into Yellowstone. Like the Yellowstone thing is cool, right? It's been a few decades now. People kind of like come to this sort of equilibrium, it's people recognize that there was an overpopulation of elk for sure. I mean, they used to have these hunting seasons where they would hunt them in the snow in the winter because there were so many of them. They wanted you to just be able to pick them out and just shoot them for meat. Because they really didn't have the resources, because they didn't have the apex predators. Because a lion can only eat so many of them, so male lions weren't really putting the dent in the population of intelligent, hunting, cooperative animals like wolves could do. So they brought it back. It's been relatively successful. They've knocked the population of elk down more than 40%. I mean, that's probably wolves are schools to have around, but Montana's very different than Aspen.
Right.
It's very different when you're in the mountains of Montana and you see a wolf versus in someone's cattle ranch in Aspen.
Right.
This is stupid. Like, why did you do this?
But what's interesting, this class that I took, so it was a debate that I taught, it was a debate. And what I made them do was assume roles of a rancher, a politician, a conservationist, and I had several different roles, and then I randomly assigned whether they were pro or con. And they had a couple of weeks to figure out what their debate was going to be. They took a vote before the debate. And as you might expect for 18-year-olds in California, you say at the beginning, should wolves be introduced? 100% yes. They do this debate, and I did it 4 years in a row. And every year, after they had to do this, after they had to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and think about it from their perspective, it would shift. And the majority of people would be like, yeah, no, it's a bad idea. I think if you give people the tools to be able to think, they can imagine themselves in a different scenario. And we need to do that. We need to be arming people with thoughtfulness rather than jumping to a conclusion.
Yeah, and also ballot box biology. It's like if you should,
But everybody's going to vote, so
but you shouldn't be able to vote on things that you're not educated in. It's like if you allow people to vote on things that have tremendous consequences to the ecosystem, like a reintroduction of an apex predator, and they don't understand those consequences. They just have this very utopian idea of what it means to bring back wolves. Like, I love them. I think they're amazing animals. It's just like putting them in, Calabasas is probably not the best idea. Putting them where people live they're gonna eat pets. They're gonna eat a lot of things that are penned up, whether they're sheep or goats or whatever people have that they can get at easily. They're not gonna chase down a herd of elk as hard.
Well, they're biology, right? They're not making decisions on where they can find their next meal.
Exactly.
We're not planning on rewilding direwolves, just to
That's great.
put that out there.
I like that.
Plus, you've met Khaleesi, and I don't think she would be.
I bet she will in a couple of years.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah, but right
in a
now,
couple of years she'll freak you out.
she kind of freaks me out already when you look at her. But yeah,
His eyes are so intense. They're so intense. You know, when you look into a predator's eyes, there's something about it. It's like you realize, like, oh my god, I'm like a watermelon. So, you know, we're just like so weak and soft.
Yeah, we've been putting together, not because we're not going to release them, but the next step for their lives is to study them and see, you know, how they're changed by their DNA being modified, measure things like their gene expression, learn the consequences of the work that we're doing, learn how they interact with the habitat, introduce Khaleesi to her brothers and the next animals that we make to them. Take a small time, but they will stay on that secure, expansive ecological reserve.
Yes, and you're not going to let them breed.
No, the plan is not to let them breed.
How will you prevent them from breeding?
Well, at the moment they're separated,
Right.
but we'll probably use subcutaneous. You know, you can put a hormonal contraceptive. Yes.
Right.
There's been some ideas of maybe, so we don't want to castrate them, which would obviously be a way to stop it, but because we want them to be able to reach their full size, because we want to know what that would be,
Right.
and we want them to be able to have the hormones to be able to do that. So, but they will be controlled. They're you know, we track them. There's cameras on them all the time. There's 3 separate layers of fencing to keep them in. We know exactly where they are. They couldn't get a splinter without a camera somewhere seeing it, and we know exactly what's going on with them. So. Yeah, we'll
That sounds like a scene in Jurassic Park. We haven't told them.
yes.
On cameras.
God, do I sound like the scientist? I kind of do, actually. I was in Mauritius.
Which scientist? Jeff Goldblum was the scientist that
I'm
got
Henry Wu, right? I'm the chief scientist, right? So I'm a good guy for now.
Right.
But he becomes a bad guy in the future, right? So I'm looking forward to my evil transition. We're not making dinosaurs. There were other cool animals that we were Kevin, I heard you talking about the American genome.
Yeah.
And so we have 2 high quality genome sequences from American genome.
Wow.
We want them back to help with our population problems.
So let's get to the criticisms, because there's people that are saying that these are not dire wolves, that what you've done is just manipulate the DNA of a gray wolf.
They are dire wolves because we have manipulated the DNA of gray wolves. We took dire wolf genome sequences from animals, one animal that lived 72,000 years ago and one animal that lived 13,000 years ago, and we lined them up next to each other and figured out what it is that makes a dire wolf a dire wolf. And then we used the tools of genome engineering to bring those traits back in Romulus, Remus, and Khaleesi, our 3 dire wolves that are alive now. And that has created these animals that you saw that are bigger and they're stronger and they have that dire wolf coat. And that's a cool thing too. That coat, the light coat color that you see, was something that we absolutely could not have known without the ancient DNA, because no one has ever seen a dire wolf. When we published a paper before I joined Colossal many years ago that was about dire wolf evolution, we had a paleo artist reconstruct what dire wolves looked like, and they made them red or reddy brown, and that's because so many other animals seem to be reddy brown, like mammoths or Neanderthals seem to have had red hair, and so we thought, sure, why not? We didn't know because we hadn't sequenced the part of their genome that we could use to see what color the coats were. But both of these 2 animals that we had higher coverage DNA from had gene variants, genes that are associated with pigmentation, how our coats, the hair color and eye color and things like that, that suggests that they had light-colored coats. And so we thought, that's cool. We'll have that as one of our key dire wolf traits that we're bringing back.
Is it possible that it's like other wolves where there's a variation, but you would only sequence the DNA of ones that had white?
It's possible, yeah, and I'm sure there were different colors, but it's interesting to me that 2 animals that lived so far apart from each other in time and geography would both have this light colored coat. So maybe that every direwolf had a light coat, but must have been a predominant color in the population.
What was the environment in which they lived? So if they lived 13,000 years ago, you're talking about the Ice Age, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that that's why they had white hair?
It's possible. Both of these animals were from the northern part of their range, where it would have been colder. They did live through previous interglacial periods. 125,000 years ago, it was as warm as it is today, or even warmer, with predicted to be no ice at the poles. And also, we know direwolves were really common around the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. We haven't been able to get any DNA out of anything from La Brea. That would be an amazing discovery.
The tar just destroys everything.
Don't know if it destroys it or if it gets into the bone in a way that we can't get the DNA out. So somehow inhibiting the recovery of the DNA. We'll get there. I mean, someday we'll figure it out. And that's going to open up a lot of really cool.
It kind of makes sense that, like polar bears having that white color would aid, or polar bears actually have
That their hair is long and it's clear. And that's why polar bears. Have you seen those pictures of zoos where they look polar bears look green? It grows in the brackets. And so it's too wet.
Oh, they mold.
Inside their hair.
Oh, wow. Them being that color.
Yeah.
And something that's completely white.
Yeah.
And you don't see like a grizzly bear, you see like, oh, look at that dark blob.
Yeah. We did some work in my academic lab. We discovered that polar bears and brown bears hybrids with each other. This is one of those funny stories about academia with a scarcity mindset there, where we submit a grant proposal and we say, hey, we have this really cool observation that polar bears and brown bears hybridized during the last ice age when they overlapped with each other, and it gets rejected because they're like, that's dumb, we know that doesn't happen. And then we found another hybrid polar bear from the previous interglacial, and then there's evidence that they're hybridizing today.
Yeah, they
so out to do this, yeah. So whenever they overlap geographically, they breed. But what's interesting about this is that we always find the hybrids living like brown bears, even though it's probably that the mom is a polar bear. Because a brown bear boy will wake up, from hibernation and go out onto polar bear territory to scavenge for food. And a polar bear female is an induced ovulator, whereas brown bear females are seasonal. So a polar bear female will ovulate in the presence of a male. So the male comes up to her and will mate her. And the other way around, if a polar bear brown male, had encountered a brown bear female, he's probably more likely to eat her than to mate her. And so, but that's weird. And so why do we always find the hybrids living with brown bears instead of living with polar bears? And the polar bear biologists who we've worked with, I've worked a lot of time with Ian Sterling, who's a fantastic polar bear biologist from Canadian Wildlife. And his hypothesis is straightforward, that they can't successfully hunt seals if they don't have that white fur.
Completely makes sense.
It does, right?
Because they have that ability to swim, they dive under the water, and they're also like really clever, and they use those ice shelves, swim from one ice shelf to another.
Yeah, but they hide they even have this thing where they cover their nose with their hand, the black nose with their hand.
Because the black nose.
I know, it's insane, right? Biology's cool.
It is cool. It's cool to like, think of like how they became successful doing that. Who figured that out? How do they have the self-awareness that their nose is dark and then other animals can see it?
But they also hybridize when just given the chance to do so, right? Because biology doesn't recognize species constants, right? Biology doesn't care that animals polar around there and play on that animals polar there. They run into each other. They're like our Neanderthal ancestors.
Are those hybrids? Are they? Can they?
Yes, yeah, this is actually how we discovered it, because we found that the place where brown bears hybridized with polar bears during the last ice age was probably the ABC because the ice was that far south at the peak of the last ice age, and brown bear boys would move all to the islands as the habitat got better, where they encountered these populations of polar bears that had been stranded there as the ice receded very much, and so they hybridized there, and all the brown bears in North America today, that mixture.
Wow, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, it's just like how we all have ancestry from mixing with Neanderthals. Is that from the Germans? Because there's a couple of bears that
But that really looks like a hybrid, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It looks like there's a lot of traits in both of them.
Thank you, Rafa, for the help.
Hey, bears are so expensive. Yeah. So that's it's really. I'm glad you said it that way. That nature doesn't know that there's a polar bear. Right. It's just our definitions. Is this part of the problem with the criticism of the science? Is that we are being very specific about what we're calling these things based on our own definitions that we all agree with.
Yeah.
The true nature of genes is that there's this like proliferation and fluctuation and all these animals through the earth. It's like
It's kind of that, but it's also that we haven't agreed, right? So there's this group of academic scientists who are trying to grasp completely to this very precise definition of a species as having to do with DNA, how much DNA matches something else. But that is, and it's interesting. I think the reason that we keep having this conversation is because it's genuinely interesting to talk about species concepts. We have come up with, dozens of different species concepts, and they're all for a particular purpose. If I am wanting to have a conversation about dinosaur fossils or anything that's a fossil, I'm going to use the morphological species concept because that's all I've got. I'm going to compare the shape of this bone with the shape of this bone, and if they're similar enough to my trained eye, I'm going to call that a species. And that's why there's a bison. Yes, yes, I was going to say skull out there. That's yeah, the steppe bison, bison priscus, or bison crassicornis, bison occidentalis, bison alaskensis, bison. I could go on forever on it. This is the naming of bison was like super art in the 18th, 19th centuries, mostly 19th
Did
century.
you go to the boneyard?
I haven't been to his. I didn't go with it, but I've been working up at that farm for years. And we spent a lot of time working in gold mines outside of Dawson City. And I think that the gold is amazing. It's an old-timey gold town, dirt roads, sidewalks. The buildings are all crooked because the fire burned all in and most of the power goes underneath. It's where I learned what you're supposed to do when a fight breaks out in the war.
You're supposed to.
I'm leaving.
You're not leaving when a fight breaks out?
Not in Dawson City. There's mosquitoes outside. No, it's
I will tell you.
it's a weird place. They still have these.
Women fighting don't scare me so much. But then, women can pull out guns.
That's true, but it's Canada. It's less likely for that to happen than in Alaska. But there've been weird things happen there, and there's you go out to the bars in Dawson City. How am I telling these stories? This is ridiculous. You go to the bars in Dawson City, and they still have this thing where there's the bell. And if you ring the bell, the person who's running the bell's buying a round for everybody who's at the bar. And you learn, after you've been there for a while, that a person's only ringing that bell because he wants the right to talk to everybody who's in there because he wants to fight with somebody, right? This is somebody who's like a diamond driller who's just got paid in cash for the first time, and he's like, now I want to fuck somebody up, right? So he comes
Really?
in,
That's what they want to do when they get paid?
rings the bell, and then goes from table to table, sitting around with people, and we, the nerdy scientists, paleogeneticists in the corner, are trying to just be super nice Canadians. I'm talking to these people like, I don't want to fight.
And he's just looking to fight with someone?
Just looking to fight. Yeah, it's a weird part of the world. It's a fun place to work. But anyway, I digress. There's gold mines like that, like the site outside Fairbanks that are super protected like this, and every one of the miners out there has like this cool collection. Not any nearly as cool as his, but because he's got so much land and collected there for such a long time. I read those great stories about how he donated material to the American Museum.
Well, it was previous owners of this property.
Right.
Because that's the case, right? And they dumped it in East River. And so they denied dumping it in East River, so then they hired these guys to go and die for it. And John Reeves told everybody where it was.
Yeah.
I don't know if he hired them, just told them. But so these guys dove in East River, they found Steph Bison, bones, jaw fragments, all sorts of different.
Do you know what I think about that story? I really like it, right? Because I'm sure it's true because they have so much of that material in the American Museum. When I started working on bison, and I worked on bison for 30 years, right? When I started working on bison, getting back to the species concept, I was trying to figure out if the DNA mapped to these species names, and they've got a fantastic collection at the AMNH. But a lot of it is crap. There's so much bone there, broken pieces, and we're like, what the hell am I going to do with this? No, they shouldn't have dumped it in the river. Obviously, that's dumb. But he is going to get the last laugh. We won't know because he'll be long dead. But in 10,000 years, when the paleontologists of the future are looking in that river, they're going to be like, what the fuck?
Right, because there's like tons of it out there.
What happened here?
They found, what's that guy's name? Dirty Water Don? Is that his name? This one guy who's one of the divers, he's found multiple pieces.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure it's there.
yeah.
And they probably didn't mean anything terrible by it. They were just like,
Those people aren't even around anymore.
Yeah.
I think this was in the 20s, wasn't it?
probably around the 50s. That was when most of the collection came from. There was a ton of gold mining activity in the 50s and 60s around Fairbanks.
So what they have found on John's property that's so spectacular is that it's really only a few acres that he's getting all this stuff from.
Yeah.
Which makes you question, like, how did all these animals die off in mass in this very small area?
Yeah.
Where you've got warehouses filled with bones and tusks.
Yeah. Near Dawson, it's called the Klondike region, you have this really fine glacial silt, and that settles in different places in different quantities, and it settles really quickly, so you get this really fast, thick buildup of this really fine silt that preserves the bones really well. So when we go, the gold miners they're placer mining, so they're taking these high-pressure water hoses and washing away this frozen dirt, and they let it thaw for a bit, and they wash away the next layer. They're trying to get to the gold-bearing gravel that's underneath. But while they're doing that, literally thousands, tens of thousands of bones come out of there. And in some places, it's more rich, more intense than others, but it's there. I've taken students up there, and they're all mopey because of the mosquitoes, and, they're mopey because they're 19. And they're like, oh, we're never going to find anything. They jump out of the trucks and they're like, holy shit, is that a mammoth Jew? Like, yeah, that's a mammoth Jew. Yeah.
Yeah, is that what you brought up?
That's what I brought you. It's a fossil. It's from South Carolina.
Wow. That's from South Carolina?
It's a fossil. You can see it's fossil.
I don't think like nails and this stuff, which seems to me it's kind of gross.
Yeah, that has
Unless you're one.
and of course it's branded. It's colossal, you know. But yeah, mammoths. Do you know the story about our founding fathers? No. Yeah. So Thomas Jefferson was obsessed with mammoths.
Yeah, how did you even know about it?
So they were guys probably mastodons because it was these teeth that were melting out of the salt licks and things like that in the upper part of the States. But he was obsessed with them. He was getting his friends to mail him teeth that he was finding, and he was. This is a funny story. Let me see if I can get it right. And you should listen to this hilarious. How mammoths weighed America. So there was a guy in France. Books. He was like a Comte de Buffon. But he was writing a series of books and history. And the fifth, I think, of his books was called The Theory of American Degeneracy. And when it was essentially about how all American animals were more shit than animals from everywhere else in the world. And it was during the War of Independence, and so it was really popular to hate on American stuff, right? And so he couldn't have pissed off Thomas Jefferson more if he tried. He didn't know anything about Thomas Jefferson. He was busy fighting with Linnaeus, and Linnaeus was busy classifying things, and this guy was like, there's no more than 200 species of animals anywhere, so why would you bother with that sort of academic silliness rather than think about, like, how the animals got this way in the first place? In his mind, like, discovering why American animals were so shit was the right way to be spending your time as a natural historian. But this petty roast fell off, and so he was trying to figure out how he could prove to this guy that American animals were actually better, bigger. So he was getting his friends to compile lists of things about, like, how American bears are bigger than European bears, American wolves are bigger than European wolves. And it isn't that, you know, you come to America, like this guy said, and you suddenly get weaker and your blood gets watery. That was what
That's what they found?
Yeah, that's what and it was a bestseller apparently.
That's incredible. So they thought like living under oppression was really good for you. It's like strength training.
They were probably imagining, I guess when people came over, there were new diseases, they probably did.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
So there was probably something in it, but so Jefferson went so far as he had a moose sent to this guy's house on his doorstep, but it was like partly run, like got there and somebody put the wrong, antlers on his head. It was just like really dumb. But his main feature was mammoths, that he knew that this animal, he didn't think they were extinct at the time, and nobody really knew about the idea of extinction. He was convinced that since we were going to find them, that people were going to find these mammoths still there, and that was going to prove.
Isn't that incredible to think that just a few hundred years ago, that was the pinnacle of science? That was like the peak of understanding of all the species that were still alive. We really didn't know.
What I don't understand about this is how a person, with a scientist, can look at how everything has changed in a couple hundred years, or in 20 years when it comes to genetics, and still say, oh, we know everything.
I think it's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
It's just weak people. And there's weak human beings out there. The way they think is a very weak way of thinking, and they want all the attention for themselves, and they're very egotistical, and it's also very supported by academia. There's a lot of bitchy infighting in academia. It's really gross. Late 18th century, the idea of extinction was only just beginning to be popularized by some thinkers.
George Cuvier.
Yeah. Jefferson wasn't among the believers. In a pre-Darwinian age, extinction was a violation of religious ideals. God would not let animals go extinct. And secular ideas that balance of nature could never be so significantly upset. So for Jefferson in particular, extinction was just an unusual theory. It's fine. The bones exist, he wrote. Therefore, the animal has existed. The movements of nature are in a never-ending circle. That's the real question. Like, there have been animals that went extinct and then came back, right?
The dire wolf.
Right. right? That was because of you guys. Wasn't there like a bird that dog was extinct?
That's not true. They didn't go extinct,
Right.
But
Right, like sort of like the Tasmanian tiger.
they just
Right?
oh no, Tasmanian tiger was definitely real.
That's some paper fallacy. But Bigfoot was real. It was Gigantopithecus. They think that that was real.
But Gigantopithecus is really old.
Right.
But would have changed until I mean I told you I have tested. People send me all kind of crazy things. The insulation was one of my favorites. This is something that I got while I was still doing my PhD. People would send us all sorts of crazy things.
Insulation, they said it's Bigfoot fur.
Yeah, it was from a guy somewhere. No. They didn't say it was fur. No, it was better than that. It was, yeah. He was from somewhere in the Carolinas, I can't remember where, and he sent a letter, and it was a handwritten letter on his personal stationery, which had a naked girl dancing around a pole, which gave him obviously more credibility.
It's a stationary crazy email. It's Mr.
Was it
Written letter. It was true. I'm sorry. Everything's
So, and he sent a couple of cuttings of information from his basement, telling me that the family of Bigfoots that lived in his basement is urinating on this information that Sarah Fine was getting in. Bigfoot DNA was going to be from that information.
Oh boy. Did you test it?
Of course they did. You really did. What?
I would have tested him for meth. Let's test some. I mean, what were you doing, dude? Bigfoot bees in your basement.
I didn't get any Gigantopithecus DNA, and it was you know,
So what was the year the Gigantopithecus we believe would extinct? So the both was very shocking in the early 20th century, right?
I don't actually know. I think it's just billions of years old.
I think the story is that the anthropologist was in an apothecary shop in China and found the bones. I think this is it was in the early 20th century, and I think he said, where'd you get this? Like the giant primate teeth. And they took him to the place, and they found jaw indicated it was bipedal. And they tried to discovery. I don't think they have a full skeleton. Right?
Well, most things from paleoanthropology are I'm going to rewrite your history because I found this person over
Here's the problem, right? You get to this things will never be possible, right? So we don't even know how many species existed in ever as fossils are, right? So we're essentially getting the tiniest bits of information. We're trying to piece together this understanding of billions of years of creatures on this earth, and to do so arrogantly, it seems so crazy, right? And to be arrogant about something that has just by the nature of its existence, and they find it is a warning and a resource.
This is one of the super fun things about ancient theory, right? So, as we said this, but we don't have any idea if you're a paleoanthropologist, if you're a past instruments. But I know that my DNA is ancestors. So I can look at a ton of sequencing DNA from the people that are around, and I'm lucky enough to get it from these books that I know is about human history. The other anthropologist or archaeologist would be getting ancient DNA because it was going to be like, oh no, Neanderthals and humans didn't interbreed. Oh, it turns out people know about that. So based on what we know.
That's the biggest thing taught it so arrogantly. Did people breed with animal? No, that was impossible. I mean, they would say it so arrogantly. This is just an expert teacher.
And how good they did. And we were able to learn so many cool things about humans from studying this Neanderthal genome. I mean, I know people get hung up on DNA and how you need lots of DNA to define a species, but we have been able now to look. I think one of the coolest things that we've learned from the Neanderthal genome is that we all know that we have somewhere between 2 and 5% Neanderthal DNA in our genomes. We kind of get that. Get your DNA tested at one of these DNA testing places. They'll even tell you how much Neanderthal you are, so you can have a competition with your brother and your cousins. I'm more Neanderthal. Is that we all have a different 2 to 5% Neanderthal. And if you were to go around and collect all of the Neanderthal DNA sequences that were in people alive today, we could put together like 90%. Wow, that's cool, right? So, 2%. said that they're teaching by pulling together people who are alive today. That's just fun. It's not a question. Second is, what the hell is going on in that other side of something, right? And if we don't know what it is that makes us human, that's what we call it. Right? That's where we ask, what are the mutations that arose since we split from Neanderthals? That if a baby got that part of the Neanderthal DNA, it
Keith, you're in some trouble.
Small break.